Clean. I'm the host, and tonight my guest is Rebekah Alcock. She's recently completed her work as a performance dietitian at the Melbourne Football Club. She's also worked at the Melbourne Rebels, Melbourne Storm, and the ACT Brumbies. Rebekah completed her Ph.D. on the topic of nutrition support for connective tissues in athletes at the Australian Institute of Sport, and currently consults the Western United Football Club, and is currently consulting to the Emerging Athletes Program at La Trobe University. In the new year, Rebekah is due to start at La Trobe University full-time as a lecturer and researcher in sports nutrition, and will be continue to develop the performance nutrition program for LEAP. The Prepare Like a Pro podcast mission is here to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome back. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me.
Round two
Yeah.
on the download. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this chat, and let's dive right into the beginning of your career. At what age did you discover you had a passion for sports nutrition?
Yeah, so I was a bit of a late bloomer to, I guess, deciding my career. So when I finished high school, I went over to the UK. And then, as I mentioned last time, when I got back, my dad was sick. So he passed away about 7 months after that. And then a few years later, I was in New Zealand with a boyfriend at the time, decided I no longer wanted to be a waitress and that I was going to come back to Australia and start doing some study. Basically redid year 12 from that, found out what I enjoyed doing, kind of narrowed it down into what I could foresee myself doing. And then when I sort of decided on becoming a dietitian, it was kind of clicked as though that was sort of what I've, a really good fit for me and what I've always probably wanted to do without sort of realizing it. And I don't, in terms of being a clinical dietitian, I didn't love being in the hospital setting, and I guess optimizing, someone's body and ability to perform was what kind of really sparked my interest, and so obviously led into sports nutrition.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's a inspiring story. When you mentioned how you went back to year 12, like for someone listening in, how did and is interested about going back as maybe a mature age, whether it be uni, and having a career path. Maybe they're in their mid 40s or 30s, and they want a bit of a change in their career, or like yourself, being in your early adulthood, going back to high school. How was that experience, and what were you hoping to get out of it? Was it clear to be a dietitian at the time, or was it more that you just wanted to get into university and work out your career from there?
Yeah, so I redid it at TAFE. So I finished year 12, but I got quite sick and sort of had some family stuff going on. So I did it just because I wanted to see, what I was interested in and see sort of how well I could do when I applied myself and sort of had the capacity to do so. And like the experience, it was probably one of the fondest, I studied for about 13 years all up, and it was probably one of the fondest memories I have of studies because the teachers are so passionate there. Students want to be there. So there's no one kind of mucking about in the back of the class being told off. And, so it was just a fantastic experience. And yeah, I would 100% do it again. And so from there, I kind of, found that health and human development was a real passion sort of interest of mine. And then, just narrowed it down to sort of, either psychology or speech pathology or dietetics, and then continued to narrow it down until I got to nutrition. And then, as I said, once I kind of realized that's what I wanted to do, it just kind of clicked, and I was like, okay, this is, always had an interest in this, but just didn't realize that's what I had that, particular passion in. So
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And it's a good point. Like, you can have a few different passions and different experiences. It's all around sort of health. And you mentioned that later on you discovered your passion also for performance side of things in sport. But when you're making those decisions that are quite pivotal, really, of psychology, nutrition, health, was it speaking to other dietitians? Was it leaning on some mentors outside of the course? How did you come, for those listening that aren't sure where they want to go, where their path is, how did you come to find that nutrition was the one?
I went and saw a job sort of counsellor guidance counsellor, I guess, at the TAFE, who was really helpful and said to get a job seeker guide and literally go through the whole book and highlight everything you can foresee yourself doing, and then just keep, eliminating different things. And then it was literally down to speech pathology and dietetics, and then
Oh, wow.
just got down to it, and I've never looked back. And like I love studying it, which is why I'm kind of getting back into the academia side of things and wanting to do more research. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good exercise. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And then you mentioned the passion for performance side compared to clinic. How did you go about discovering that passion?
Yeah, so I think so I was at Griffith Uni, and Michael Leverett and Ben Desborough, two sports nutrition sort of researchers, lecturers, were there, and it was just the course that kind of stood out. It was more fun and just a bit, I don't know, just different, less dry than kind of that clinical dietetics. And I think doing placement as a dietitian, we get taught that you go into uni and you have to come out and be a clinical dietitian that works in a hospital. And doing placement, I just was like, this isn't for me, trying to tell people that have often not necessarily made the right choices, and you're trying to get them to improve their diet, and they've got no interest in doing that. That kind of solidified that was the path I wanted to be on. And then I was just drawn to it. I think I just found myself doing activities that were going to lead me into doing sports nutrition. So
Yeah, and you mentioned you've had over a decade of the academic study and research. PhD is no easy feat. Could you tell us your motive behind doing it, and why did you want to do it on sports nutrition?
Yeah, so coming out of uni, as a lot of uni students in general, I suppose do, I struggled to find work. So I was just picking up little bits and pieces here and there, doing still hospitality and things like that. And so we have to have a mentor the first year out of university. And I had Alan McCubbin, who was at the time president of Sports Dietitians Australia. And I was doing sort of some activities with him, shadowing, going to different sporting events and things like that. And I was just getting a bit frustrated not getting a job in the kind of area that I wanted to. And I said to him, look, I do want to do a PhD at some stage. So I'm thinking I might go back and do an honours degree to see if it's floats my boat, if it's something I want to do. And then he kind of put me onto a few researchers. So I ended up at Monash, which I'm actually back at now doing some casual work under Ricardo da Costa, and I was doing my honours project was on ultra endurance athletes, so optional sort of nutrition support for them. So that kind of started my, I guess, research sports nutrition career, and then from there I was like, I definitely want to do PhD. I didn't think I was going to get into it as quickly as I did. I pretty much went straight out of honours into a PhD, but it just happened like that. So yeah
That's amazing. And was it as challenging as you thought it might be?
Probably more challenging.
Yeah.
So it was in Canberra, so I was at the AIS, and then I was working with Brumbies, so it was kind of a unique arrangement. So it was situated at the AIS, working with Brumbies. That money was funding the research, and that was through ACU.
Okay.
So typically a PhD is working, just a PhD full time, but this was kind of doing a PhD full time and then working part time, and so it was really challenging having to sort of juggle those two things, competing interests and things like that. So that time management thing became really important.
And did you say the funding was part of the part-time responsibility as well? The funding for the PhD. Oh wow.
Yeah. So the money that was like coming in from Brumbies was sort of funding the research, which was great in terms of I didn't have to look for as many grants and things like that. But it just meant that, I was on a PhD income. So even that, like, you're not on a lot of money. So it's pretty challenging just financially. And you've got to be pretty committed. I mean, there's some dietitians that are working, doing their PhD, they've got a family, and I just honestly don't know how they do it. Because
what's the ballpark roughly? Like, is it base wage?
So a scholarship's probably around $30,000.
Yeah. And like you said, you're doing that and a part-time, full time, and that's in elite sport as well, which is plus some. So you can you can try it on for size and imagine that's a fair amount of workload.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, it sounds like you knew where you wanted to go with it, and you would have had strong drive. For those that are going through challenging times with PhD, how did you what did you learn about yourself? What were some important tools to use in terms of like organization and how to prioritize and your scheduling? What were some things that you grew, I guess, from a personal side that helped you get through that period?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of elements. So it was in my mind, it was kind of, 15-hour days, but I knew that there
Yeah.
was an end in sight. Well, I thought there was at the time, until I, yeah, started working. But yeah, sort of thinking that that's only temporary. But I think it probably took me, I kind of started to realize it, I suppose, in my PhD, the importance of balance, but didn't click until sort of getting out into work and trying to juggle too many things, and like essentially like getting burnout, to realize that balance and time off and not guilting yourself, because if you don't have that and then you're mentally fatigued and it's just really, really hard to do good work, and you end up taking twice as long to do something than if you just allowed
Mm.
yourself the day off and, socializing with friends and family. And so I think it's really hard to get your head around, because you think you have to, the more you work, the more successful you're going to be. But I think you just burn yourself out, and it has the opposite impact. So I think, scheduling time for yourself and scheduling that downtime is really, really important, because or else you're just not mentally going to be able to get through it.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned there were conflicting interests. What were your role? What was your role at the Brumbies? And was that your first experience, I guess, helping professional athletes as well? Um,
Yeah, yep.
yep. Yeah. So it would have been a steep learning curve,
Yes,
I
that
imagine.
I was quite lucky, because my high performance manager there, Ben Sapel, he has done a PhD himself, and he was quite a good manager in terms of, if there was, less work to do at the club, then he'd say go home and work on your PhD, or have the afternoon off. Or and then I was mentored through that role, from Louise Burke and Greg Shaw, who are my two PhD supervisors. So I was really, really well supported in that role. And I know there are a lot of embedded sort of PhD servicing roles that individual may not be necessarily that well supported,
Mm,
which would, yeah, it would just make it such a hard experience. So I think I was really lucky to be able to get that experience, but have really understanding supervisors, and yeah, people kind of were sensitive of my time. And if everyone along their PhD at some point wants to quit. And I remember going to Louise and saying, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And she said, that's fine, do whatever you need. If you need to take 6 months off, and then just that, knowing that I had that option, kind of led me to just keep going, because I was like, okay, I'm not stuck in this position. But I think people that don't have good supervisors, I can't, yeah, I just don't know
yeah, that support.
how they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's just even someone to lean on, and like you said, have a bit of a soundboard and say some things that can just help make you feel like you're not stuck, like you said, and that it can just shift the mindset. So that's great having that
Yeah.
mentor. If you didn't, what do you think you would have done? Would it be creating some external mentors, like for those that are in that position, and now that you know the value of having it, but if you don't know it and you've never had it, maybe you think it's just all on you. How would you go about creating that relationship, I guess?
Yeah, I definitely think mentors. So even like in my career now, I still kind of call on mentors, supervisor mentors, for career related advice. And it's good often as well to have someone that's removed from the environment but understands the environment. So
Mhm.
obviously you've got academics or researchers that, may not have worked practically. And then you've got people that are working practically that may not have done research. So if you can find either like, one of those that can understand different elements of stress that you're going through, or if you can find someone that's had that embedded experience of doing research and working, I think that, that would probably help, because they'll kind of be able to give you ways to manage, your
Yeah,
time and just your mental health, I think, as well.
yeah. And what was the research focus with your PhD?
Yep. So it was nutrition support for connective tissues. So
Yep.
Greg Shaw, one of my mentors, had previously done a paper with Keith Barr looking at the impact of gelatin on engineered ligaments. So ligaments are kind of made in a little petri dish in the lab, and then they're tested for kind of their collagen content and strength. As well. So it was kind of a lead off from that kind of area. And mine was more sort of looking at, I guess, optimizing the protocols, I suppose, to getting to that point. So I know Keith Barr is still doing a lot of research in that space, and he does amazing podcasts. So if I'd highly recommend listening to those, because he's excellent at sort of explaining scientific things in a really approachable way.
What's it called? We can add it in the show notes, maybe.
So I think he just appears on something. So he's got My Muscle Science, I think is his
Yep.
Instagram, and then you could just Google him on podcasts, and he speaks about it. So
Keith Barr, yep.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll add it in. And so yours was almost implementing the information and having some protocols that practitioners could use with athletes.
Yeah, so it was kind of looking at, timing. We looked at, because obviously bone broth was all the rage at one point. So we looked to see if that was a decent amount of the amino acids that are present in collagen, because obviously it's just everywhere. If you went into health stores, there would, dehydrated, there's jars of it, all those kind of things. And then we looked at the timing, so when it actually peaks in the blood, so after consumption. So with collagen and connective tissues, timing is really important. So we wanted to see when it actually is present within the system. And then we also wanted to see if we could find a marker of collagen intake to kind of be able to kind of control background intake. So it was all kind of that stuff to, make a really robust study that needs to be done to kind of answer those questions, to be able to implement that, really well-controlled study.
Yeah, it sounds thorough. And you mentioned the timing is important. What would be some takeaway things for athletes that are keen to strengthen their connective tissues and prevent them, or get stronger, but also to prevent them from injury?
Yep.
What would be some big takeaways to start practicing?
Yeah, so with the like your ligaments and tendons, because they're obviously poorly supplied by blood, the idea of the timing is to have it when that blood flow is peaked. So it's taking those amino acids, when they're peaking within the blood to the tissue at that peak time. So we found that was between sort of 30 to 40 minutes.
34 minutes. This is post-exercise?
Pre-exercise.
Oh, pre-exercise.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're wanting
to system.
Yeah, so you consume it, it peaks in the blood, and then when you've got that peak blood flow, they're kind of there ready to go to, I guess, take to those tissues.
Interesting. And then was different training programs involved at the time, like or are all athletes doing a little bit of main strength, power work, and conditioning, or there's a different AIS athletes that you're working with?
Yeah, so we didn't actually do any sort of intervention protocols. This was more just purely looking at, taking, getting them to consume different collagen supplements. And we also looked at casein as well, and then taking blood at different time points and then analyzing that blood and then seeing where those amino acids peak. So then from there, that would sort of guide your implementation strategy of when you'd be looking at it, when it's sort of, as I said, optimal in the blood to get it to those tissues.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you mentioned bone broth is all the craze in the health food stores, and it's everywhere. Is it a worthy thing to start implementing into your nutrition regime?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I developed lots of different types of bone broth. The thing about bone is it actually contains metal as well. So in that fact, it can be dangerous if you're over consuming bone broth, because you may over consume metals, but it also kind of left this really metallic kind of smell throughout the AIS, which I wasn't the favorite person for a while there. But we looked at some sort of commercial varieties. We made some, we got some from a paleo store, and they were all just all over the place in terms of their amino acid content. So when we're looking at that targeted amount of that sort of collagen protein, it just wasn't found to be reliable enough to use as kind of a source. And then, as I said, it's got that risk of, ingestion of metals.
Okay. And what was the most consistent? You mentioned casein, was that?
Yeah, in
Yeah, good
terms,
source.
yeah, so so collagen, obviously your gelatin and hydrolyzed collagen, they've got those kind of key amino acids. We don't know yet if casein. So obviously, when you break down proteins, it's broken down into amino acids, and they're different types of proteins have different sort of amino acid profiles. So yeah, we obviously need to do more work and studies to see if there's sort of any impact of casein compared to hydrolyzed collagen, because
Yep.
there's sort of different amino acids, and yeah, it's not clear whether it's a specific amino acid or peptide chains of those amino acids that are sort of having the impact. So there's kind of a lot more research in that space that needs to be done. But yeah, for the bone broth varieties, just too variable. Whereas obviously collagen, your supplements, you're getting a targeted amount.
Yep. And is there a role in nutrition for injury management and or prevention for footballers?
Yeah, so obviously the collagen space is a big one. So collagen is the most prominent protein in your body. So it's in skin, it's in bone, it's yeah, as I said, connective tissues. So it's in all of your body's tissues. So potentially there's a role with collagen supplementation, with injury prevention, and then obviously your bodies are made. We need to eat to survive. So it kind of makes sense that if you don't eat, your body's going to break down. So if you don't have good nutrition, your body's going to break down, or you're not going to be optimizing that tissue integrity. So it's something that athletes will often roll their eyes at dietitians when we say, eat good diet quality, because it's kind of like eat your fruits and veggies and, your dairy and all these kind of food groups. But there's a good impact in terms of injury prevention in that, because you're providing your body with everything it needs to make like strong, rigid tissues. So if you think of bone, muscle, connective tissue, yeah, so there's definitely a role in terms of that. And then, there's more sort of I guess, increasing awareness around, potential low energy availability in team sports, which has been well studied within sort of female athletes, but not as much in male athletes, and certainly not as much in this team sports area. And this low energy availability can have an impact on bone health, for example. So there's definitely a role in terms of prevention and then also treatment as well. So you can actually speed up an athlete's return to play by supporting them with the right nutrition. So
Yeah, and I imagine it would vary a fair bit, but is there a recommended amount of collagen we should be having each day? And how does that depend from body mass to gender and age, or what are the key sort of variables, I guess, that people need to be aware of?
yeah, so that's still research that needs to be done. Um,
Yeah, there's
so
another PhD right there.
yeah, exactly. There's so much unknown about that space. And I know
Yeah,
Keith's
okay.
doing sort of more in the performance-based sort of area within the collagen research. So at the moment, the research is kind of 15 to 20 grams. I'd be surprised if there wasn't a dose response, because obviously, your tissues are different sizes if you're a smaller compared to a larger athlete, but it hasn't sort of been looked into at this point in time.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's
yeah,
more in terms of the amount, it would be trying to get to that 15 to 20 grams, which yeah, is not too difficult. And it's more around, I guess, timing with what tissue you're trying to target.
yeah. And then um, for those that don't want to take supplements, or yeah, maybe from a funding point of view, or they just want to get it from real food, what would be some food choices to make to get that 15 to 20 grams?
Yeah, so it's harder to get in food sources. Again, great study, a great research area to have a look at. Sort of, we know that it stays in the body for only 6 hours, so it's not going to kind of build up and going to increase in amount.
Mhm.
With the food source, so just gelatin. So like Mackenzie's gelatin, it's like used for cooking, and obviously a component of jellies and things like that. It's a food source of collagen, so it's not necessarily, it's really cheap. It's not as palatable as like a hydrolyzed collagen, because hydrolyzed collagen has had bonds broken, so it mixes a lot easier in water. But if someone doesn't sort of have the funding, that's a good option if they can just get it down and yeah, without the need for supplements. So there's a few recipes floating around for jellies and gummies and things on the internet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but jelly itself isn't a good source because it just doesn't have enough of the gelatin in it. So
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there you go. That's a shame.
Yeah. So I
That
have
means
tried making marshmallows because they're obviously got gelatin in them. So
okay.
yeah, if you can be
Yeah.
creative and have a little test in the kitchen. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
You can get your gelatin in with your desserts.
yeah,
Very good.
exactly. Just have a really, really thick jelly every night.
Yeah. And what about protein intake and post workout? There seems to be a strong myth in the fitness industry about the window post training, and for those that want to build muscle mass or maybe help optimize recovery, there's this like special window of whatever it is, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, seems to change a fair bit. But what's your take on it? Protein intake for for an athlete, let's say footballer that wants to gain some muscle mass,
Yeah.
how important is it? And what are some things to focus on when it comes to protein intake when you want to build hypertrophy?
Yeah. So the protein spread and distribution over the day is going to be more important. So post training, I guess, you want to kickstart that recovery. So the sooner you can get it in, the better. It's not going to be magical if you do that on its own, though. It's more sort of getting those regular hits. So often, we'll back end protein intake towards the end of the day, but making sure you're getting it in breakfast, potentially your snacks as well, depending on timing. So every 3 to 4 hours is what we kind of recommend. And the good thing as well is there's plenty of high protein foods out there now. So, you've got Chobani Fit, you've got YoPro, Complete Dairy. Like there's plenty of food sources there that you can get those hits of protein in. But you're also, in terms of injury prevention, you're also going to be getting things like calcium in through those intakes of food. So you can kind of hit multiple goals with choosing food sources. So yeah, that would be kind of more, I guess, important than just that
Yeah.
post exercise intake.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic, because it seems to be quite popular in nutrition and probably the same with fitness industry, there's a lot of trends and things sort of come back into fashion and then they go away for a period of time. But what's your take on diets for someone that wants to get a result, get an outcome? Yeah, what's your philosophy when it comes to following a diet, whether it be paleo, being vegan, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
keto?
Yeah, so I guess there's like as a dietitian, as a clinical dietitian, in the back of my mind, and every other dietitian that I know, we're always going to be promoting that dietary adequacy. So I don't think it's our job to tell someone necessarily they can't eat a certain way if they really want to, if they really want to try something out, but it's our job to make sure that they're getting all the nutrients that they need, that they're not going to be putting their bodies at risk. There's no, in terms of, if they're trying to lean up, for example, it's more about that energy deficit. And I would say maintaining that muscle and having a good amount of lean mass, that's going to be more effective than some, diet that, potentially is going to actually break down muscle and have the opposite ultimate effect that you're trying to have. So I would say general healthy eating, but there's certainly no sort of quick fix, but it's more just about that energy manipulation and making sure you're eating according to your training loads and fluctuating your intake so you're not having an excessive amount on a day you're not doing any training, and then the flip side as well, you're not under consuming when you're sort of needing that for performance based efforts and things.
Yeah, and what would be some good resources for those that want to educate themselves? What would be like your go-to for someone that wants to read up on eating healthy and getting that energy intake in?
Yeah, so Sports Dietitians Australia have some really good fact sheets just for general information for different sports, and we'll give kind of specific information around training diet and body composition and things like that. So I think they're a really good, it's a really good resource for athletes. If you want to get a bit more scientific, the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, I find their fact sheets and sort of summaries of the research is really good to be able to sort of put everything together. And it's kind of that, as I said, that next level up from sort of the more simple fact sheets.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to your career journey, so you're working long days, like you said, gearing yourself up 15-hour days, and it's a bit of a grind, but you're getting through it. How did you get to Melbourne, and what was the progression from working in the institute, doing a PhD, and then working at Brumbies part time? What was the next step from there?
Yeah, so I'm actually from Melbourne originally. So I moved over to Canberra for 3 years to do the PhD.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of my PhD, when I was doing more the sort of write up, which is that's the arduous part because you're writing, 60 to 70 plus thousand words. There was a job going at Melbourne Rebels, and as I said, Ben Spell was a great manager, and I said to him, "Look, I would love to get back to Melbourne," and he said, "Go for it. I'm not going to hold you here." So, came back, got into Rebels, and then obviously being situated at Amy Park, there's multiple teams there, and then eventually, I think maybe a year. Yeah, it was just actually before I'd finished my PhD, the role came up at Melbourne Football Club. So that's
Handy
how that
timing.
eventuated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So straight into full-time work before I'd finished my PhD. So it was just, from starting year 12 to now, it's just been
Oh
non-stop.
well.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good on you. It it's leading you in a great. You've had many opportunities both in research and elite sport, so it's amazing and it's inspiring for someone that wants to work in that space. It does come down to hard work, I'm sure, and many other things, but you can see that your work ethic is something that obviously you value, and is that one area that you feel you've always had, or have you been out, or have you sort of worked on that? What's your sort of take on work ethic and the importance of it for working at at the high level?
Yes, I think like I wanted it. I wanted it so badly that I was prepared to just continue to do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah.
As I said, I burnt myself out at one point. So I think there's only so long that you can maintain that. So I think it's just being persistent, and there's so many setbacks and so many disappointments, and it can suck, but then you just got to move on, and then get into the next thing and just keep pushing. So I guess it's similar in sport, like you win some, you lose some. It's the same kind of
Mm.
concept with work. You just kind of keep, whatever setbacks you have, just keep going, trying to take it in your stride, and just keep working.
Yeah. And for those that aren't aware, haven't worked with a sports dietitian before, or maybe haven't worked in sport before, what would be a typical day when you're working at that stage in your career where you're finishing your PhD in the writing stage and then working part time at Rebels?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's hard to say because working team sports, there's no 2 days that are the same, and it's
Mm.
hard, I guess, as being a bit of a planner. You try to plan as much as you can, but then their training venue changes, or particularly with COVID. 1 minute we're going to South Australia, the next minute we're going to Tasmania. So, there's no like structure in terms of what you're doing day to day. It just depends on having an overall view of what you're trying to aim to achieve, I guess, throughout the season, and within the week, and you kind of target areas. But in terms of writing, that was literally just sitting at my computer for hours, walking to the fridge, seeing what was in there, going back at my computer. That's
Yeah.
pretty much the end of the PhD. And that's a less glamorous side of research. The fun side's doing the data collection and finding the story from that. And then I guess working as a sports dietitian, you're in there pretty early. Particularly Melbourne is training out at Casein Fields at the moment, so that's a good hour drive away from St Kilda, which is where I'm currently at. So you rock up, and then it's kind of trying to get those. You can try and plan some sort of one-on-one consultations, but often it's just those corridor chats that you're having with athletes that they're the most effective ways. And then in the background, there's a lot of sort of food service and catering, and particularly that was a big component in during COVID, because obviously there was a lot of traveling and hotel stays and quarantines and all those kind of things as well. And then things like your supplement management, making sure there's no risks to the players, making sure everything's batch tested. There's times where I was cooking snacks for the players, and then obviously you've got things like preparation for game day and then actually doing game day. So it's pretty varied in terms
Mm.
of what you're doing, and you obviously try to make an overall plan, but sometimes it doesn't always fit perfectly like that in sport. It's just being adaptable, I think, is really important in that setting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that and getting a better understanding, I guess, of the context on how it all works. And it sounds like there's a few different hats that that you need to have, whether if you're working on the academic side and then also pursuing the elite game. And then I imagine, did you have to work in the clinic a little bit as well in the private practice to make ends meet during those years?
Yeah, so I did during my PhD. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, PhD. Like you moved back to Melbourne after the Rebels,
yeah.
after Brumbies.
Yeah, so I was doing a bit of clinic work, more so in terms of just not wanting to box myself into one particular sport or, just team sports. It was more kind of trying to keep my experience a bit more broad. And obviously, it's a completely different setting. In a private practice setting, you've got someone there for a good 30 minutes to 45 minutes, up to an hour sometimes, where you can, do a lot of education and things like that. Whereas, as I said, in sporting environments, it's more kind of on the fly consultations. So, and I guess in private practice, there's a lot of sort of weight loss and things like that. So behavior change is a big component. So it helps support what you're doing, I guess, in team sports, but also, it was trying not to narrow, I guess, what I was doing in that setting.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the feeling like? You mentioned you received a full-time role at Melbourne just as you were finishing your PhD. Sounds like it would have been an exciting time in your career. Everything's coming together. Firstly, I guess with the PhD, how long did it take, and what was the feeling once it was complete?
Yeah, so it's 3.5 years, and then you sort of send it off and you have to make amendments to it. And then sort of all up, it was about 4 years. Um,
Yep,
so yeah,
which is
printing,
uh, pretty quick for
yeah,
those in elite sport, I'd imagine.
yeah, no, it was I got it over and done with pretty quickly, which was nice. But yeah, that printing off and then binding everything up, and then just I had this paranoia handing it in that I was going to get hit by a car or something on the way there, just that I'd finished this thesis holding it in my hands, and I was like, no,
Gonna fly
just want to,
everywhere, yeah.
yeah, just want to get it handed in now. So yeah, it was pretty awesome. And then yeah, I mean, a bit of an anticlimax getting the certificate via email as opposed to getting up on stage during COVID, but
Oh no,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, that's a bummer.
yeah.
Um, and looking back, is it everything you want it to be in terms of growth and opportunities and opening doors in your career? For those that are thinking about it, is it worth the hard work, do you think, and the
Yeah,
dedication?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. As I said, that persistence, it definitely paid off because after a while, people start to know that how committed you are to, you know, being in that role and succeeding. So that's, I think, what gets you the job. So obviously, having a PhD is great, but if you can kind of show you're really committed and you're really keen to sort of put the work in, I think that's what ends up getting you the job in that area. So yeah, and I suppose my progression to now sort of going into lecturing and back into research, I feel like I've got a good set of experience sort of under my belt now. So when I'm actually teaching, I'll be able to talk about real world experiences and be able to with research have more sort of applied research rather than something that's great in a lab but may not work in sort of a team sport setting. So
And the full-time role at Melbourne, were you replacing someone that was full-time? Were previous dietitians there part-time? Um, yeah, talk us through what's the typical sort of setup for a sports dietitian working in an elite sport. Is it casual, part-time, full-time?
yeah, so it was only casual. Sorry, it was only a part-time role.
Yeah.
So I was doing sort of Melbourne Rebels part-time and Melbourne Football Club part-time. And then that when COVID hit, like it wasn't possible to sort of work in the two different settings. So it's pretty rare to have a full-time role in a team sports setting. And I definitely think the work is there, and I definitely think it can, particularly when there's men's, women's teams, academy, sort of VFL, things like that. I definitely think there's enough scope.
Mm.
And as I said, with different elements of having a role of nutrition for injury prevention and management, there's definitely enough work there to be able to have a full-time role, but it often just doesn't happen that way. So it can get difficult because often you're juggling multiple different things, and sometimes a lesson that I've had to learn is saying no to opportunities, because sometimes you get really excited and you say yes to everything, and then all of a sudden you're trying to stretch yourself too thin and you're probably not doing as good a job at things as you want to, because you're just trying to do too many things. So
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice. And what about for the athletes listening in? Melbourne obviously won the premiership a lot of success, and yeah, they're probably going into the next couple of years favourites at this stage. They're certainly a red hot team and club. What were some things that you noticed in the club and with the players that they did really well? And what do you get excited about when you're working with an athlete and they're asking certain questions, or they're just presenting in a certain way where you think, yeah, we're going to get a good result here.
Yeah. So I think resilience is that key thing. So persistence, that whole, a loss, like the way that they would pick themselves up and kind of go back to dealing with things with a sense of humor. And, it wasn't like sadness at the club for like a week and leading into the next game. It was just that real resilience. And I think Max Gawn's great at sort of leading the team through that. Like even within in a game, he's kind of picking them up, even, and obviously they did that a lot. They turned around when they were losing. So I think that's like a massive key thing that they sort of had. Yeah. And I think in terms of, I think, yeah, that's probably number one, and initiative. I think the athletes, and I've seen it in rugby and, now working in soccer as well, the athletes that take initiative and sort of, you don't have to prompt them to do things they really want to learn, and they ask questions and they're just like sponges. They're the ones that you can just see progressing. And I think often, at a younger age, talent sort of gets them through, but there's a point in your career that's, when you start aging, that's not going to have as much of an impact. And those extra little bits and pieces that you're doing, your training, your nutrition, your off-season stuff, that's what kind of has that, more value, I suppose.
Yeah. And like looking back at your career, what would be your most fondest memory? What's a highlight that you look back of, and look, proudly of, and it's a memory that you like to think about?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple. So I think the hub was a great experience. And I think like I was quite lucky because often, being a dietitian in a team sport, you're not there as much as everyone else. So building that rapport can be quite difficult. And obviously being in the hub, you're kind of around people and, seeing them in social situations, and you wouldn't have as much contact. And I think just getting to know players as people, not just athletes. I think that was a really nice, memory, I guess, nice experience to have had. And playing the Anzac Day match when all the phones sort of lit up the stadium, I've never seen anything like that before, or working and not playing it. But yeah, that was a pretty amazing thing to watch. And then, yeah, I mean, during the grand final, it would have been great to be there, but watching that on TV and watching the success of the players and see all their hard work sort of come into fruition, that was obviously also a great memory. So yeah, like the last couple of years I've been at Melbourne, really fond memories, and really nice to be able to sort of have that to go into the next part of, or next phase of my career.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your next phase of career is back in research, with Monash and La Trobe in the new year. Take us through the role that's going on with the program, and what will your role entail?
Yes, that's still sort of being worked out. So at La Trobe, they've got that emerging athletes program. So really, really exciting space. It's something they've only recently just got a S&C in that role. So Mitch is the S&C. And I've just started obviously as a performance dietitian. And it's really kind of a blank slate. So it's awesome because it's athletes. It's got, judo athletes, cross country skiing, AFL, rugby. So it's all different types of athletes, and awesome experience. So trying to sort of build up that program and see what we can actually do with that. And obviously there's a lecturing component. So going to be lecturing predominantly, I think, sports nutrition, and then obviously the research. I think I'd like to, utilize the emerging athletes there, but also hopefully do some research within footy clubs or within that sort of applied setting as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned there's a lot of work in elite sports, and you've worked in all the three big codes in team sports now, like AFL, rugby, and A League. What do you think like, how do you think that program could work? Would it be one head sports dietitian that oversees the VFL, women and men's program, AFL women's in the academy, and then you've got one dietitian in each that are sort of like casual, or would it be better to have maybe a men's dietitian and then a women's dietitian, both full time, that look after all the program? Yeah, how do you think? What do you think the future is in sports dietitians at clubs?
Yes, I think I quite like the model that they have in the UK, where they've often got a lead sort of dietitian, and then dietitians, it might be a junior dietitian or whatnot working underneath them. So then, you're obviously overseeing maybe the men's program, then you've got a dietitian working with the women's program, that kind of thing. And obviously, like with VFL, there's plenty of opportunities to sort of work across multiple teams and things like that. I'd like to see more research being done. I mean, Dom Kondo and M Meehan are doing some research in AFL at the moment, but I'd like to sort of see. I'm hoping that with my role at La Trobe, there's obviously links. The universities have links to the footy team, so being able to combine those roles a little bit more and be able to do some more sort of research and so I think there's multiple ways that it can be done, and there's a massive amount of scope. So it would be really nice to sort of see some full-time roles, but also some research being embedded, and then internships and things like that as well. I think it's a really good opportunity. Obviously sports nutrition, there's not that many roles. So if there's an opportunity to do some internships and have dietitians coming out of uni that aren't just clinically, based or clinically trained and thinking that the hospital is the only setting they can step into, I think that would be really nice to see that sort of evolve as well.
Yeah, yeah. And does the clinic, like you mentioned, that you don't have as much time in the elite sport, does the clinic, those consultations and I guess getting in the time and the reps, so to speak, does that help transfer to when you don't have as much time in elite sport and these corridor conversations, or are they completely different beasts altogether?
Yeah, they're completely different. To be honest, I think that in the corridor conversations are more effective, because if you think of sitting there with someone for your information gathering, but there's only so much information someone's going to take in at one session. So
Mm.
and then you don't see them for another month, so it's really hard to kind of get that traction. And whereas if you see a footballer and you've got 2 or 3 things they're working on, you can just kind of keep checking on that and growing from that. So it's I find those corridor and those brief but more often, I find that more effective than 1 hour or whatever, and then not seeing them again for a month or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how would you, like, would there be a system in place, or is it more just you would, all right, I've got 30 minutes, I'm going to aimlessly walk through the gym, I'm going to go, I'm going to hang around this area because that players are going to walk past you? And do you have a list of players that you're going into that time block or that day where you're like, I need to get to this person? Or is it more just organic and you just sort of let the players almost come to you and it's more a player-led scenario?
Yes, I think it's a bit of everything. So, like, obviously, if you've had a game on the weekend and there's some injured players, they'd probably be priority, because you're wanting to sort of kickstart what you're doing, nutrition support with them to help, with the healing or whatnot. And then you might have a list of players that you're working with, sort of long term. And then, yeah, it's all a bit of everything. And then obviously, sort of the younger players, like you've got some opportunities to do education sessions with them, but not much. So often if they're proactive and they're kind of coming up to you, and you might be packing a game day box and they just come up and say, hey, I was wondering about this. Yes, I think it's all kind of a mixture of everything. So, and that's, being on ground provides that opportunity, because you are there, you can go into the gym, like you said, and, just they might have 5 minutes between rotations or whatever, that you can just quickly catch up with them. Yes, I think it's a sort of a combination of everything. There's not a lot of structure often. And yeah.
Organized chaos.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the developing athletes, what were some common things that you would change with it? Or you mentioned the 2 to 3 things that an athlete would focus on. What were some common trends amongst developing footballers?
Yes, I think that back to that sort of diet quality and diet adequacy, it's one of those things that it's not, doesn't sell. It's not one of those glamorous kind of things, but it has so much impact that, it's going to have more impact than any supplement or any, post training protein shake, or so I think that's kind of the key thing that you're starting at. So obviously making sure that they're sort of eating well first and foremost, and then training, obviously supporting what they're doing with their training so they've got enough energy, and recovering and not putting themselves at risk of that low energy availability, or and I think just getting them to start their brains kind of ticking over on what nutrition means, because we were briefly chatting about nutrition just being thought of as body composition, but obviously there's so much more that we can do, and often they will comment, oh, I didn't know that had a role in injury management, or had a role in this, or so I think getting them to start thinking about how it's going to work for them, and obviously there's not a one size fits all, so they might think, okay, I get gassed at the end of the last quarter or whatever, or I've got this niggling pain, or so trying to be more, get them to reflect on what they need nutrition to be doing for them. I think that's really important to try and get that sort of started, embedded early within them, so they start sort of practicing that, and continuously reflecting on that.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, thank you so much. There's been a lot of information that's come through, but also more importantly, how to implement that information, which I really appreciate you coming on, Beck. And if I do find that first version, well, we can make a bit of a hybrid video for those listening in the podcast world. We did do an interview with Rebekah probably 2 months, 3 months ago now, and on search for it. So if I find it, there was gems in there as well, but thankfully Rebekah was kind enough to come back on, and I'm really glad that we've had this time to share your journey, as well as have you on and help educate the listeners around the importance of nutrition, particularly around athlete development, performance, and injury prevention and rehabilitation. What's on the horizon for you for the rest of the year, Rebekah? You're going to get some time off. You mentioned it's been a pretty big decade for you.
Yeah.
Have you got some time off? We're up and about now in Melbourne, which is good. What's the rest of the year look like for you?
Yeah, so I just had a couple of weeks off, and just I didn't do much. Just got back into training and just explored Melbourne again, because obviously we've just opened up. I'm doing some casual work with Monash, so working with sort of gut integrity team that works at Monash there. And then Western United, obviously they're in season now, so doing some consulting with them, and moving over to the other side of town, so moving over to Northcote, so obviously to be closer to La Trobe Uni, which will be nice, bit of a change up. I've been in this area for about 3 years, so definitely like a fresh start. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, and having a bit of, I'm not working at the moment, but just not working as much as I was, which is really nice.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, that's awesome to hear. Well, thank you for coming on, and thank you for those that have tuned in live, and for those listening in the podcast world at some point in the future. For those listening live, our next live chat is with Kevin Ball on the 30th of November. That will be at 8:30 p.m. Kevin's a biomechanist, a real expert when it comes to kicking biomechanics. So if you want to listen into that episode, head over to our YouTube channel and we'll post the details on our Instagram. But thanks again, Beck, for tuning in, and thanks for everyone else for listening.
No worries. Thank you.